members, Janelle McKee. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Sean Wilmore. I'm one of the founding members or board directors of Voices of Mornington Peninsula. Inspired, I suppose, both by the efforts of Kathy McGowan and Zali, who's joining us today, and also a desire to have proper representation or true representation down on the peninsula as well. So I'm really thrilled that so many people have joined us today. To start things off, before we get into our fantastic lineup, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. Unfortunately, Lionel couldn't join us today, Lionel Lorch from Living Culture. He was due to join us, but sadly had a death in the family last night, and he sends his apologies, but to let us know he's with us in spirit today. So a poor replacement for Lionel. He was going to play the Yidaki for us, but I'd just like to acknowledge the country of the Bunurong people that we mostly join from today, others from further afield. And pay our respects to the elders past and present and emerging as well. And that's not just a token piece, that's something that's quite special to VMP and to all of our gatherings that we acknowledge the Bunurong people. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our host, our MC, Tracee Hutchison. Tracee is from the Peninsula, or the Inch as we call it sometimes, or the Insular Peninsula as some others call it. But Tracee's a career broadcaster. She's a local, a TV reporter, and a producer with over 30 years of experience at the highest level in national and international media. Her career spans ABC TV 7:30 Report, News Radio, Radio Australia, Australian Network, SBS. I think you've got them all covered there, Channel 9 and 7, Triple R, which is where I think I first met Tracee, and 3RPP on the Mornington Peninsula. So we're thrilled to have Tracee MC and facilitate this session today. Having hosted our launch event a couple of months ago. So please welcome Tracee.
Thanks, Sean. It's wonderful to be here again, and I also want to acknowledge this incredible country that raised me up, the country of the Bunurong people, nourishes us daily. We're very, very, very lucky here on the peninsula. I'm also really pleased to be facilitating this event on behalf of the Voices for Mornington Peninsula in my very voluntary capacity as MC, as a fan of grassroots democracy and the very strong community focus of the VMP group. We do, as Sean mentioned, have a fantastic panel who are going to talk to Craig's really great film, sobering film, inspiring film. His directorial debut, big deal, is Democracy for Sale, and I know we've all had a chance to have a look at that over the weekend. We'll also meet Zali Steggall, OAM, the independent member for Warringah on Sydney's Northern Beaches, and long-term ABC Foreign Correspondent Eric Campbell, and former ABC colleague of mine as well. So I'm thrilled that such an incredible, high-powered panel have been able to join us for this discussion this afternoon, which is all about community-led representation and keeping politics honest, and picking up some of the themes in Craig's film about whether democracy is indeed for sale. But first, I would like to introduce the chair of Voices for Mornington Peninsula, Louise Page. Many of us here would be very familiar with Louise's work with community to defeat the AGL gas hub proposal in the Western Port. She's also a long-term resident of the peninsula. So I'm very pleased to see Louise again and welcome her to this conversation. So hi, Louise, great to see you.
Hi, Tracee. Good to be back with you.
Indeed. Look, I thought it might be a really good opportunity just to, press reset in many ways about what the Voices for Mornington Peninsula is all about, and also perhaps to counter some of the narrative that's going on as we gear up, of course, to another federal election either later this year or next year. So perhaps it is a really good opportunity just to speak to those very basic aims of Voices for Mornington Peninsula and answer that critical question about, is VMP a political party?
Sure, and it's a question that gets asked a lot because, I can see how community get a little bit confused because we talk about candidates and we talk about representation and all these things, but fundamentally, Voices of Mornington Peninsula is a community group. So we're here to represent the community, and we're striving to improve our democracy. We're striving to raise the bar on politics. We're striving to engage people. So we're not a political party, although I can see how people find that confusing. But our role is to represent the community and act at it, perhaps as a conduit for community in between where we get to that candidate and leading up to it.
So based very much on the Voices for Indi, and Cathy McGowan joined us in the launch conversation a couple of months ago now, based very much on that kitchen table conversations and the community hubs to support an independent candidate to run. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about what some of that selection process is about, but we might just sort of tick off a couple of those issues that have been raised more recently around the Voices of movement more broadly. The Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg has called on the Electoral Commission to investigate funding sources for the Voices of groups. I think you've probably answered it in not a political party, but what is your response to that? How do you counter that argument?
Sure. So at first I had a bit of a wry smile because I know how hard grassroots work, and you know the sort of donations we're talking about don't compare. So it's really the money that VMP is receiving. We say we won't accept political foreign donations because we abide by that as in the electoral role, even though we're not a political party. We see that that's a good thing to do, and so that's what we do. We need to maintain the sort of integrity that's expected of any group, and we are very transparent in what we do. Again, there's really not much to be said in answer to that because we're not a political party. Like, we understand that anybody who is a political party and that the independent candidate would need to uphold the same rules that any other group does in the political sense. But we are a community organisation. So there's not really anything to answer, if you see what I mean. It's not that we're trying to hide from being transparent or don't want any donations known, but it's really that it doesn't apply to us because we're not a political party. Is that sort of clear?
Answers my question. I'm sure if others have questions that they want to raise around that, Louise, that will come through in the chat. There is an opportunity to feed in questions through the chat now. So if there are specific issues around some of those questions around the Voices of movement, we will attempt to address those in this conversation and also more broadly as we raise other issues.
Sure.
But you know, all the contact details are on the website. People can go to that. I should also say, for transparency, that I'm not part of the movement and I have no intention of putting my hand up. So I'll put that out there as well. But as we saw in the last federal election, Louise, with the Vote Tony Out group in Warringah, we're seeing it with the Vote Angus Out in the seat of Hume in New South Wales, Vote Josh Out in Kooyong, targeting the federal treasurer. And we're seeing it here in the seat of Flinders, the Vote Greg Out group on social media, targeting the current federal member and Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt. Your aim, as stated, is to support an independent to contest the seat, and presumably you'd like that independent to be able to take the voice of the Peninsula to Canberra. So is VMP associated then in any way with the Vote Greg Out group on the Peninsula?
No, we're not. So getting back to the fundamental basis for the Voices of is to improve democracy. It's not about getting rid of anybody. It's not about targeting anybody. It's that we want to see greater representation. We want the community to be heard. We want the community's priorities and values to be known, and for that candidate to represent us. So that independent voice that speaks on behalf of us. So it's not, we're not going like gunning for anybody or taking on any of those behaviours that might be seen by the political parties. So Vote Greg out, separate to us. They can do what they want. We're not in any way aligned, and we're just running our race, so to speak, and they can do what they want.
One final question before we meet our panelists and broaden on that discussion, Louise. So where to now? You're a few months in terms of launching a couple of months ago, with some community hubs around the peninsula, on both sides of the peninsula, and having had some of those kitchen table conversations that I know you've been having. Where to now for VMP? How far along in establishing or identifying that candidate are you?
So we've had our expressions of interest, and we've got some firm candidates. And the next stage is to go to the members and say, what is the process that you'd like to see? So it is all about the community selection. It's not up to the board to decide at any point. We just a vote, just like every other member. I mean, I think that's essentially what people need to remember too. The board are community members, and we are people who helped found the group because we are invested in community. So we're one of the members. It's not like we get to say what happens. We are merely the people who help that process. So it'll be up to the members of VMP to decide how they want that decision to be made. So whether they feel they want to have a town hall type environment, whether they're happy to see the facts about the people and make some decisions some other way, whether it's online voting or however it happens. But that's the next point, and we're almost at that point.
Fantastic, Louise. Great to cover off some of those really key points around the motivation and who you are, and I guess specifically also who you are not, and that process that is well and truly up and underway. And thanks for the comments. There've been some comments come through that appreciative of being able to get some clarity around that. So always great to hear from you, Louise, and stay with us for the conversation.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Tracee.
So very pleased now to introduce our panel, who will have an opportunity to speak individually too. So I've got a couple of questions, things to ask each of our panelists, and then we'll move more broadly into a sort of the three-way panel conversation that will also involve your questions. A reminder, if you'd like to put anything through for any of our panelists, please pop them into the chat, and that's being fed through to me. We could go for quite a long time, and we've set a time limit at 4 p.m, so we've got 45 minutes left to go, which is still a great amount of time. So I am really delighted to welcome our first guest, who is the director of the film that we've all had a chance to have a look at, I hope, over the weekend. A big deal is Democracy for Sale. Craig Reucassel would be familiar, I'm sure, to all of us here, been a fixture on our TV screens for a couple of decades, Australian writer and comedian, best known for wreaking havoc with The Chaser and for going through our garbage bins on the war on waste. Most recently, he's hosted the ABC series Big Weather and The Fight for Planet A on ABC Telly. He's also the executive producer of Win the Week, and I rather like that. It's part of my weekly viewing, Craig. Big Deal is Democracy for Sale is his directorial debut, and we're thrilled that he's been able to join us this afternoon. So welcome to our conversation, and great to meet you here.
Good to be here, Tracee.
What motivated this film in the first instance, Craig? What really made you think, okay, I'm going to make this film, but I'm going to make it as a director. I'm not going to be in it.
Okay. Before I go on, can I just say I'm coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Can I also secondly say the photo that was put up there, just because Zali is very much pushing for truth in advertising there, I didn't choose that photo. That's from about 10 years ago. So just for truth in advertising reasons, that's definitely, you're looking going, who the hell is that? Looks nothing like the photo that was there before. But look, and just also before we go on, can I say congratulations to everyone who has joined us on a Sunday afternoon to discuss democracy, because you are the kind of, what we were looking for is people getting engaged and being active members of the democracy. So congratulations, that's really important. Look, this has been a topic I've been interested in for a long time. You know, money in politics is quite fascinating. I've never quite got to kind of sink my teeth into it, but I'd at the time, I actually had come off the back of doing a couple of documentaries about climate change. And it felt like, despite all the kind of elements that I'd covered in it, the unspoken part of it was really, you'd kind of hit these walls when you look at climate change in Australia. You go, this is really strange, because it really seems to make sense for us to deal with this problem. We get massively affected by climate change. We have huge resources that can actually benefit from making the transition. There's all of these kind of things. You go, how come we're so recalcitrant on this front? And I guess money in politics is part of that. So I was very fortunate enough I was literally just invited along to kind of give some ideas to Christian and Jungle Entertainment, who were looking at this idea. And then by the end of a few days, they said, you should direct this. I was like, well, I don't really direct. But they talked me into it, and it was great. I really enjoyed doing it, because it was fascinating. And even though I kind of have had an interest in this topic, to kind of really sink your teeth into it and to see it on the ground level is it was shocking at times. I mean, I don't know, for those who've watched the movie, I do apologize. There's moments of the movie I think are quite depressing. There are some more uplifting moments towards the end, maybe, but it is kind of a depressing topic at times. And the Voices of movement, it's interesting, really interesting, because in a sense, it's come about partly because of this problem of influence in politics, because what you're seeing is people in the community going, hang on a second, how come my local member, despite the fact that we voted for him, and, I may be Liberal or Labor or whatever, I'm not saying that, despite the fact that we're voting for them, how come they're not reflecting what we keep saying we want? And that's really where this movement's come in a sense, is to try and firstly gauge what people actually think and want. And then, in some cases it leads to independent members, in other cases it doesn't. In other cases, it's just about communicating that to the local member. But it's a really, really vibrant and great part of democracy, to be honest. And I'm very glad that was kind of something we could cover in the movie, because, as I said, it could have been pretty glum.
Yes.
Without that element there.
Yeah, it was that sort of, that lovely moment where you're holding on and going, surely there's come on, Craig, there's got to be
something in this.
Yes,
oh man, I mean, we filmed the movie, in that kind of order as well. So there was times where it just felt really depressing when you're in the midst of Sam Dastiari just laying it out to you for an hour long of how it happens and what you do and where the money goes and that, and you just come out of that going, oh shit, this is really terrible. So
and beautifully conceived to have it in a big empty restaurant as well. So you're sort of left to left to the imagination of the kind of deals that would go on around those Lazy Susans with the meals rolling around. You talk about very specifically the donations from the last federal election with Dr. Lindy Edwards from UNSW, and she talks about the Liberals 165 million, the ALP 126 million, no requirement to disclose until, well after an election, over half remaining undisclosed. And then we've had just in the last week or so, the former Federal Attorney General having his legal fees against the ABC bankrolled by a blind trust. What does that say about, I guess, the film in itself is a commentary on the invisible nature of a corruptible process.
And the interesting thing about the film is it's intentionally focused on legal things. We're not exposing something that's just going to get taken down, because this is legal. This is how the system works. And it's amazing how many people you talk to from the system are just like, yeah, that's how it is. And it's in a sense an attempt to kind of show, well, I don't think that's really an acceptable system if that's how it is legally. And it's interesting with that kind of 160 million, 120 million, a very large amount of that already comes from the public purse. Do we need to have these really high amounts being topped up from private sources on top? Wouldn't it be an more equal system if we had really some tight restrictions on those, on the level of donations and also the amount that could be spent by parties, because it leads to this, well, Zali said, a corruption of the system. It's, both Sam Dastiari and Malcolm Turnbull talked about the arms race, and we need to find a way to end this arms race there. And at the moment, the rules are really not there to do that. So it's, there is some disclosure. I'm not saying nothing's disclosed, but it's set up in a way that really tries to hide it. And, it's only above a very high threshold. It can be you can get around that threshold in many ways, and it's generally hidden so that you don't really find out about it until a year or more later. So it's got a hell of a lot of holes in it.
I'll bring in the time to bring in the federal member for Warringah now, if we could. Zali Steggall, lawyer, former Olympic athlete, famously won the seat of Warringah from former Prime Minister Tony Abbott in 2019, and also Australia's most internationally successful alpine skier. Welcome to you, and thank you for making time to join this conversation on this Sunday afternoon, Zali Steggall.
Pleasure.
What for you has been the most alarming aspect, I guess, that you've witnessed in your time in federal parliament around lobbying and influence?
Yeah, well, if I could pay my respect to the land on which I am. Ironically, here in Warringah, it's contested, so I can't name a specific tribe, but I'm hoping that will be resolved soon. Look, as a lawyer, I found it quite shocking, especially in the campaign, so that essentially there is just no limit to what could be said. And what we are seeing is a rise of third-party groups getting involved in campaigns. This is no longer a question of just the major parties and a few independents. You've got all sorts of other bodies getting involved. You know, like for me with Tony, I had Advance Australia, and they were putting massive amounts of money behind him. And they were the ones that did, you know, you'd remember the Captain Get Up gyrating, you know, masquerading. I had the chicken following me around. You know, we had all sorts of things going. So I found that it's quite shocking to know that there just isn't the kind of boundaries that you have in normal advertising. And in this day and age with social media, with electronic advertising, it's so targeted how you know, for advertising on Facebook or Instagram, you can really narrow it down. So I do think it's incredibly dangerous that we just don't have the legislation has not been fixed for way too long. And the clear reason why is that the main parties benefit from the status quo. I mean, that's the reason why none of these things have been changed for so long. And, you know, they'll always point the finger at each other when the campaign may have been more successful. But that negative politics, the smear the other side, is the status quo in Australia. And you know, look, I watched the movie, and it is shocking in terms of the amount of money and the influence that goes on. And there's a lot of double standards. So you may not realise an independent has to declare a lot more detail than what a party does. So after the last election, I had to declare by November for a May election, whereas the parties didn't declare till the February the year after. And they don't have to declare on a seat-by-seat basis. They just do a whole national thing. So you could never drill down to specifically in one seat what may or may not have been spent. And you couldn't break out, for example, those separate groups like Advance Australia. You don't get to find out what they spent in addition, which is why those groups are all around.
The questions, as you might imagine, are coming in thick and fast, and I do want to introduce my former ABC colleague quickly as well, Eric Campbell. But Zali, just one more question to you, and then we will go to Eric, because this has come in from a number of different people, and it was on my list to ask as well, but it's also been posed by one of our local councillors here on the Mornington Peninsula, Councillor Sarah Race, who's talking about how do you get up, you know, how do you
that's a dangerous word.
Yeah, I know. I realised actually as soon as I said it. I mean, I was meaning to say, how do you?
I get hassled with that one all the time.
Yes, yes. We rewind that one. How do you get traction on a private member's bill, for example, that you as an independent might want to introduce into the federal parliament, and on climate change as an independent? And not have it knocked off as that bill was. How do you get that traction as an independent in the parliament?
I mean, the bill, I will still be reintroducing it. Look, as an independent, I very much stepped into politics to try and provide a more sensible centre kind of voice. I'm a bit tired, like most Australians, I think, of the polarised nature of our politics and the short-termism. So what the major parties do is they think of the next election, so it's always within 3 years. They don't really look at fixing any of the big problems. They just think of how can I wedge the other side, win a couple more seats and try and form government. And as a result, we have no policy around really big questions, and we haven't progressed. Things like climate change, like political advertising, political donation laws, all those, a National Integrity Commission, all those things just completely get overlooked because it's never in the benefit of the status quo and the incumbent, right? So for me as an independent, that's what I think we really serve a role to really put those issues on the agenda. It's an incredibly tight Parliament. You've got to think the primary vote for major parties has been decreasing at pretty much every election, right? So incredibly important to give people choice, to be able to really think about who's going to best represent them. But so both the climate change bill and the Stop the Lies bills, I only need 2 people to cross the floor to get them up. In the Senate, the government does not have a majority. They have to bargain with One Nation, the Greens, and the crossbench of Rex Sterling and Rex Patrick and Sterling Griff. So and Jackie Lambie. So it's an incredibly tight Parliament, and that forces negotiation. And now, of course, what we have is on the ALP side, and not everyone's aware, what happens is you vote for your MP, but on the ALP side, it's a caucus meeting. And so they will vote inside their caucus, but then they vote as a block on legislation. So they have no freedom to have a conscience vote or anything like that. On the coalition side, it's meant to be a broad church and a free vote, but essentially they vote as a block. Your individual vote, your MP is really a rounding error. You are just, your proxy vote for what the party room decides. But what we can do is put pressure. So the one thing I've observed is, and it was in the movie, MPs care about their job and they care about getting re-elected, especially career politicians. So if there is enough people in the community that care about the issues and are aware of solutions on the table, like the climate bill, like Stop the Lies for political advertising, and they put enough pressure on their MP to say your re-election depends on your support of these legislations, then absolutely we can get them up. That's how the same-sex marriage vote ultimately was a result of many attempts of private members' bill that put the pressure on. The Climate Change Bill Act was passed in the UK in 2008 as a result of a private members' bill. So this is democracy at its best to make it work.
Well, we might bring in long-term ABC foreign correspondent Eric Campbell, one of Australia's most experienced international reporters and one of the best. Worked in over 100 countries, specialising in Asia and the former Soviet Union. Long-term. Well, actually, I thought you were there for a lot longer than it says on this piece of paper, Eric
I keep
Campbell.
popping back whenever I get a visa, which isn't that often these days.
Yes, but 4 years officially as Moscow correspondent, but covered the politics of that part of the world for a very long time. Also included a stint in Beijing covering China, Afghanistan and Central Asia until wounded in a suicide bombing in Kurdistan in the first 5 days of the Iraq War. Very pleased to see you well and in great form, my old friend, multi-award winner as well. Can I ask, Eric Campbell, you've reported in a lot of areas around conflict and areas where democracy would not be a common currency. How bad do you think it can get, and how bad are we already on a slippery slope in Australia in terms of the corruptible nature of politics?
Oh, I think liberal democracy is on a very slippery slope around the world. I mean, 30 years ago, it looked like we had won when the Soviet Union collapsed. What we're seeing now, of course, is the rise of China's Communist Party, the incredible power that China has in the region, retreat of democracy within the European Union. God help us what happened in America and could happen again soon. Look, everything I've seen in many decades of reporting shows me that institutions are not fixed, and what we imagine is the permanent way of things can disappear very, very quickly. I mean, in the Soviet Union in the late 1980s, no one imagined it was going to collapse. Everyone thought it was going to last forever. We can, go off the cliff quite easily.
On that cheery note, how close to the precipice? I mean, I guess it's that boiling frog analogy, isn't it? You know, we've watched Craig's film, we've heard Zali talking about the challenges of being the independent in a still a very dominant two-party system in the federal parliament in Australia, and whilst there is an ability to have an influence, it's still a very limited ability and depends on what the numbers are really in the lower house. So with what we know about the influence of lobbyists in Canberra and those block votes that we see in our two major parties, what do you think, you know, the best model or the aspirational model we should be aiming for in Australian Parliament should be to perhaps avoid the kinds of things that you've reported on?
I think Parliament will always behave the same way. The major parties will always behave the same way. Lobbyists will always be in there, behaving as they always have. I think the difference now is we are seeing a decline in the strength of civil society in Australia. We're seeing a decline of you know, the independence of institutions. We're seeing you know, a decline of the independence of universities. There's a kind of concerted attack against opponents of the government, and more importantly, the keystone of a democratic society is a strong independent mainstream media. We are seeing the largest media group becoming a protection racket for elements of conservative politics that fit their agenda. I don't think we would be in a situation now where the Australian political system is incapable of acting on climate change, if not for News Corporation. There are fossil fuel companies all over the world trying to influence politics. Only in Australia have they had such success because of the power of, you know, what we read every day in the Murdoch press, and how that commentary is echoed in the Parliament. I think that is the real, you know, often unspoken risk to Australian society, that much of our media is now a cancer on political discourse.
So cheerful, such a sort
Yeah,
of a
I have
cheerful.
hidden videos I can show
Yeah,
that. I think we are in a terrible situation. When I travel the world and I see just how out of place Australia is on climate change, and I'm constantly having to explain to people how this nice country, and we're seen as a nice, intelligent country, is so frigging stupid on this issue and how intractable it is. And unless we see a minority government dependent on the support of independents who are, you know, insisting on climate change as part of the deal, it's not going to change.
I might come back to Craig, because the moment of hope that you gave us at the end of the film, Craig, was spending time with the Voices of Indi campaign and talking about how, you know, that community model, the average donation was $50 and it had come from the community. And so there was this sense of ownership of the community candidate, and that the community would in fact be with them, be supporting them in their aspirations in Canberra, and taking that voice, you know, to Canberra, as Cathy McGowan details in her book. Do you really think, though, that is the model that can change Australian politics? Is that where you see hope in terms of that modelling?
Yeah, look, I think that the point is that what the Voices of movement has is a lot of great linkage between the community and the candidate. And what we've unfortunately seen over time is, look at the major parties, you've seen a reduction in their grassroots elements. So there's a lot less grassroots engagement from major parties. So they don't have that same community connection, but they therefore, I spoke to one Labor Party member, actually, it was not in the movie, but he said, look, I used to get 150 people together paying $10 a pop. That's how we raised the money, right? And then he kind of got into the ministry and higher, and he met other people on the other side of his party who were like, I can just get 10 people together who are all going to put in 10,000, 15,000. It's way bloody easier for me. That's how it is. And you see how that happens is that, you know, the balance suddenly becomes, it's a lot easier for us to make this money from other aspects. So you get that imbalance comes from the big money side, but the other imbalance is coming from the lack of engagement on the other side. And this is not about changing the whole way our democracy works. We've got a lot of good institutions here in Australia. It's about rebalancing it. And that rebalancing requires two things to happen. firstly, you've got to limit the amount of weight that can be put on the one side from the money. It's got to be that they can't be $80 million from one person. That's a ridiculous imbalance. But it's got to be the other side, is you've got to be getting more link between the community and their political members. Now, the Voices of movement has that at its core. And interestingly enough, some of the major parties have been having more debate about trying to get more grassroots interaction, because I think they've seen this coming as well. They're recognizing we've become disassociated from the community, and that's what's leaving us to have no actual support in the community. So look, yeah, Voices of has it very much at its core, and things like it, the Indi example of, people from the community being able to go up to Parliament and help out for a week and go around with the member. I mean, those kind of things are fantastic, just for keeping that engagement up and keeping that linkage up, because that's what we need to ensure is part of our democracy.
Zali, coming back to you and your election, which was backed by the Voices for Warringah, a similar model. How do you find your ability to be kept honest by that process, by the people that put you there?
Well, I think we need to be really clear. The Voices of movement is independent. So the Voices of Warringah were not part of my campaign. They did not back me per se. What they do is they held forums at which all candidates were invited. They had already in the 3 years prior been doing what they call, the kitchen table conversations, modelled on the Indi model, where people from the community get together and they get basically a sense of what are the key issues for the electorate. They put that together in a report, and then in the campaign, all candidates were invited to forums, and we were sort of scorecarded really against the issues that they had identified. So we've got to be really clear that the Voices of, because I heard your discussion around Senator Bragg's allegations and all that rubbish, the Voices of is quite separate to when independents actually run. I guess what they do is they open the conversation, they raise awareness to the issues, and they get people engaged in democracy. Then there's a question of, is there another movement of people that are motivated to provide an alternate choice? And that's really then what happens. So from my point of view, we had a number of groups that had been engaged in trying to provide an alternate choice to the electorate. I mean, we had Tony had been here for 25 years. The seat has always been Liberal, and yet we've had independents at state level and at local government level. So there was a real question of, why can't this be moved from a federal point of view? But it was absolutely community-led. I mean, the day I announced, I had about 300 people turn up with me at a park. The system favours the incumbent. There's no doubt about that, and it favours the major parties. So you have to start from scratch. As an independent campaign, we essentially had to, it's like creating a new business, right? The candidate is the product, and you have to prepare it, put it to market, and win the market within about 4 months. So it's, you don't do that without community support. I think the point the major parties don't understand is it is local based. I had people wearing my campaign t-shirts, doing their supermarket shopping, catching the bus to go to work. They would hand out flyers and for half an hour, and then they would hop on the bus and go to work. So it's local. It's people that understand the local issues and are talking about it. This is not. So to give you the comparison, the Liberals couldn't find enough volunteers locally. They had to bring people in from other electorates, and very different, I'd say, people, approach, much more aggressive, not at all focused on the local issues. And so you have such a contrast then of who really is speaking for the community. So for me, I always say, I am one vote of the 105,000 people that live in Warringah. And yes, I've been asked to be a spokesperson on behalf of Warringah, but my vote doesn't count for any more than one compared to all the other votes in Warringah. So I've hosted, I think, lockdown makes it hard, but I've hosted about, on average, 4 per year forums. We've had over 30,000 or 40,000 emails. We've had, and my whole team is local. So
lots of ways to maintain that community connection. And the questions, as you may imagine, are sort of coming in thick and fast, and I'm doing my best. So this one's come in from Jared Tipping, and it's specifically to you, Zali, because it goes back to one of the central themes of Craig's film as well, and perhaps you can both speak to it, but and Eric as well. But it's very specific to our independence approached more or less often by lobby groups. Where does the role of the lobby group come in when it's a solo vote that they're trying to influence on the crossbench?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment they probably target the Senate crossbench more because they hold the balance of power for the vote. As you can imagine, the fossil fuel does not come and lobby me. They have not asked for any meetings. Look, the situation is, though, there are a lot of ways in which when groups come to Parliament, I mean, I meet with a lot of people, and it allows me to be aware of issues that I may not otherwise be aware of, whether it's report around certain diseases or local community groups. To give you an example, the Beetaloo Basin, I had the Indigenous owners come and present their case of their concerns about the fracking for gas in the Beetaloo Basin. And by meeting with them, it enabled me to better understand their case and pursue their cause. So not all meetings in Parliament are bad. I think a lot of them are good. But obviously when it's tied with donation, it is an issue. So as the film points out, if there is a direct link between engagement at fundraising events and the allocation of the Beetaloo Basin gas fracking contract is a classic recent example where you have the heavies in a gas company, they participate and attend a fundraiser. The next day they are flying out, the minister and staff and party staff, in a private jet to go out and visit, and shortly thereafter they are granted the $21 million of public funds for the license to do that fracking without any clear sense of tender process or transparency. So
Craig,
it is a problem.
Yeah, Craig, I'm going to come back. You talk about more lobbyists in Canberra than politicians in the film.
Yeah.
Does that the issuing of passes, that the people getting access, is that part of the thing that needs to be addressed as well?
It's part of it. I mean, at the moment, the thing is, it's a very privileged group. Essentially, it's former government members. You have to have known a member of Parliament for a year to get in there. So it's already means it's quite a privileged group. Now, Zali's right, though. I don't think we should be at the point where we say everyone that's a lobbyist is bad in a sense. Like, during this period of the lockdown, your local business area, your local business might have closed down, and your local business lobby has been going to Canberra and communicating. So I don't have a problem with that. Zali's right. You need to have as much communication from all different groups in society. Once again, it goes to the question of balance. If one group is getting constant access because they are paying for it, or because they've got so many more links, or if one group is saying, we want you to listen to us, and by the way, don't stuff us around or we won't give you 110 grand next year. Or, we want to talk to you, and by the way, there's a cushy job at the end of this. It takes away that communication being just about the exchange of information and that kind of thing. It makes it part of an exchange of money or power or influence. And that's the problem. So I don't have a problem necessarily. You're not going to have a parliament without lobbyists. You have to make sure it most adequately reflects the public, and that they don't have massively huge discrepancies in terms of their influence because of the money that they're actually holding under.
Eric, the role of the media in shining light in dark places, which has been, very much part of what your work has been internationally and nationally. Is the media doing a good enough job? Are practitioners still doing a good enough job to ensure that those lights are being shone in places that they should be?
I think much of the media is, but again, it comes back to the big bogey in the room, which is News Corporation, which I think is doing a terrible job, despite all the good journalists and good journalism does come out of that organisation. When it runs agendas and campaigns, which it does very effectively, it is the dark side. I've just come back from Spain, where I was looking at the transition from coal to renewable energy. Now, in Spain, there are very powerful lobbyists who have a lot of influence on government. They are the renewable energy companies, who are the big companies now. And they're very successful in applying, their feet to the back of the neck of politicians to say the money is in renewable. I do wonder why in Australia we're not seeing lobbyists from, what is the next industrial revolution exercising their influence over government here in a dark way or a good way. And I think it comes back to the fact that politicians aren't just reacting to lobbyists, they're also totally scared of what's going to be in the front page of the Australian the next morning. I think it is the other, dark side of this. It's not just lobbyists, it's the media not doing its job or doing it very effectively in a bad way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Eric. And it is that case as well. I mean, I think we should also recognise that there's a lot of money behind the scenes from fossil fuels that also influences News Corp as well. It's part of a very big system that's going on there. And I think the problem is in Australia, the money for renewables just can't compete with the kind of money that the established fossil fuel industry has here. But it's interesting when you talk about the role of media, because the rules have been set up in a way, you've got good journalists like Eric. Like I say, you want him to be chasing this down, right? The problem is that it's hidden. So, you do have declarations of donations, for instance, but they come out a year to 18 months later. It's hard to pitch something to an EP when you're saying, I'll cover how this has happened a year later. It's too late. So it's been set up in a way the transparency is set up in a way so that it actually tries to inhibit journalists covering it, because it makes it harder for them to cover if you don't have that information at the time.
Yeah, and there's not the money these days to set aside for a 6-month investigation, as there may have been in the past.
And I guess the next question, and I might get all three of you to respond to it. We're rocketing toward, we've got 11 minutes left, and I do want to come back to bring Louise in at the end too, and just sort of revisit the candidate campaign. But Eric, I'm also interested in your take on the role of spin, and given our the prime ministerial nickname as Scotty from marketing, I think this week we've seen the most spectacular announcement that took everyone by surprise, which was this troika with the United States, United Kingdom, and that fella from down under. In terms of us being, now in part of a nuclear submarine contract. We've got great spinners around Parliament. What do you see the danger of that, or how do you kind of see through the subterfuge of some of the spin that needs to be filtered through by the media in many ways to try and get the cut through?
I don't find it that hard, but I only do international work. So, look, when I was surprised by the boys impressed with big shiny toys coverage of the submarine announcement, when it didn't take much drilling down to see there is no announcement, there is no contract. We don't know who's going to build them, when, or for what cost. It was an announcement about nothing apart from the fact that we're going to, really piss off the French and hang out for those carbon tariffs the EU's going to start.
But it was posturing, though. It was posturing. It was about shoring
up. It was posturing. Something about wasn't there something about some politician in Western Australia having his legal fees paid? No one remembers anymore. So it was a very apt sort of huge announcement. Look, I don't know. I mean, I don't cover Australia. It's the only country in the world I don't cover. But I am continually amazed at how Scotty from marketing is getting away with a lot of things that I think in an earlier time the press gallery would have been jumping on and dissecting, which many do. I mean, I think The Guardian does an amazing job. I think Fairfax still to a certain extent does, and the ABC does. But again, it's that dark Murdoch figure in the background.
Wow, it keeps recurring. Zali, as a federal MP, this question has come through from Nick Arnott. Eric's raising News Corp and Murdoch Media as a barrier to truth and democracy. Do you have any thoughts around how you manage that issue to get your own cut through? We saw that with your attempts to get traction on the climate bills. How difficult was that for you to get clear air around that?
Yeah, look, obviously the Murdoch media is not, they don't go out of their way to be positive about me. There's no doubt. But look, I think it's an interesting era we're in now, we've sort of got social media and online media where it's readily available 24/7. So you have platforms that in some way are so much more democratic because they're open for you to access, but you need to understand how to use them well. And you also, obviously need to churn out a lot of content. But you're not as reliant on traditional media as you were, say, 30 years. If you think back 30 years ago, if you couldn't get into your major local newspaper, you had no chance of letting the local community of who you were if you were a new person coming into an electorate against an incumbent. I think in regional areas, that's still very difficult, that you've still got dominance of actual real papers. Here in Sydney, I mean, with the lockdown, we've lost most of our local publications have gone online. Most of people get their media online now. So in some ways, that is opening it up it opens up the field, but it also makes it a more dangerous field because then it's open to misinformation and lies, and it's disseminated so quickly. So it is an interesting arena, but it is people have busy lives and people have very much disconnected from politics. I think we keep hearing that, the trust in politicians is decreasing, but unfortunately, my message to everyone is that's not good enough. If this system is making decisions on your lives and the prospects of your children and everything, and you have to participate. We have a mandatory vote. It is a privilege to have a vote. You need to make your vote count and you have to participate. If you want to be a bystander, decisions will be made. So, look, the media is difficult, and there's a lot of stuff out there, but again, you have to be as proactive as you can, and visibility matters. So if you have a strong community presence and people on the ground, then for each person that talks to their 10 family members and their 10 friends, and each of them talk to you do very quickly spread the word. So I think it can be counterbalanced, but you have to very genuinely be part of your community, and your community needs to be with you.
I'm going to come back to Craig, and then I'll come back to Louise. Craig, Zali identified a really great point there about the loss of community-based media and the impact that that's having on an ability to tell stories at a local level, but also to get traction on a local level for people who may be looking to run in independent, as an independent representative at all three tiers of government, local government, state and federal. We've been talking a lot about the federal sphere, but, as someone who's sort of worked in and around media, albeit with a particularly maverick lens for the last sort of 15, 20 odd years, but, where do you see the importance, I guess, of kind of telling the alternate story, and how does that feed into the democratic process?
Yeah, look, I'm definitely not an expert on that. I mean, no one would ever call any of the media organisations that the Chaser has run to be, proper media organisations. But look, I think it's essential to be engaging in the community, and that's why things like Voices of are important, because you go, how can I talk to as many people as possible in my area? And it goes back to that kind of core message in the movie, which is really, if you're not going to get your influence by having $100,000 and sitting down for lunch, how are you going to do it? And it's about getting groups together. It's about engaging with people in your community, whether it be through your footy club initially and you get people involved through that. It's about those community-based organisations, and that's where local members can then be communicating through those and having that discussion. I mean, I'm with Zali. I kind of like see the pros and cons. I hate Facebook. I don't go on it. I think it's terrible, but it's some real pros about that. You see local media moving online there, but then you go, well, there are less restrictions than maybe are otherwise. And that's why Zali's bill about more truth in political advertising is very important there. That thing over your shoulders, I don't know if it makes it look like you're telling us you're going to lie to us or not, or if you're just saying,
no, definitely not. Well,
no. But we need to tighten that stuff up, because otherwise, as we've seen in COVID times, ironically, some of the mainstream media has been better than the non-mainstream media, the kind of social media aspects, in terms of having some editorial control to the message there. So yeah, we need to tighten up. We need to, I think as Christian said in the movie, we can't have all this money going in we don't know where it is, that's then funding things that aren't true. how can we trust a system that has those kind of problems in it? We've got to fix up those.
Can I now just? I feel like I'm breaking back into my radio breaking news voice, but I can just confirm that the Prime Minister of Australia has announced that Christian Porter has resigned from the ministry. So there will be more details in the 4 o'clock news, I would imagine.
He made the
I
mistake.
don't think he's resigning from Parliament, so they're holding on to his vote.
He made the total mistake, is that in the system, you don't hide who donated to you. You know who donated to you, and you just don't tell the public about it. That's the current system. We got more outraged when Porter didn't know, ironically.
I'm going to thank all 3 panelists. I'm going to bring Louise back as well. Louise, just to sort of bookend the conversation and a reminder for folk who are interested in VMP activities. The focus, it's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat, has been very focused on the federal campaign. But just to sort of reiterate where you're at and what the broader remit of Voices for Mornington Peninsula will be going forward, and how people could be involved or think about nominating should they wish.
Sure. Don't want to stop. It's brilliant. And I'm getting so many comments, direct messages as well, as how fantastic this is, and it should be on national television. It's such a great conversation. And on that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. You, Tracee, and the panelists, Craig, Zali, and Eric. Thank you so much for attending today. It means a lot to us to have a good conversation like this here, because it's really important for people to become engaged again, because one of the messages that we're getting through our kitchen table conversations and our surveys is that people have lost interest, they've lost hope, and we really need to get together and change that, because, as has been said, it's a slippery slope, and I think we've really got to stop it now. We've got to just stop that sliding, because the more people become less interested, the worse it's going to get. So we have our moment now.
Thanks, Louise.
Is that better, Craig?
Right, yeah, that's a much better. Yeah, have that one, Zali. That's
I'll
much
have to
better.
add a stand that says "Stop the lies."
Right, there's a couple of little footnotes. Craig, is Big Deal screening on ABC television?
Yeah, it will be later. There's a 2-parter, actually. It's a 2 by 1 hour, and later on in the ABC. So, yes.
Eric, when is your piece on Spain on Foreign Correspondent?
It's on iView.
Sorry, my apologies. Zali, when are you reintroducing the bills?
Climate Act now, climate bills will be introduced in October, I hope, lockdowns permitting, and the Stop the Lies bill will be introduced shortly after.
Watch this space. I've also received a message that there's going to be a live poll. So those that want to stay on to identify some of the key issues that you'd like VMP to further discuss or progress. So stick around. Sean, you've got the details. Louise.
No, I was just going to say, the polls just popped up.
The box has popped up.
I'll just close that off. Just before we go, I just need to say that we've scheduled some more kitchen table conversations for this week. So anybody who feels they want to continue on saying what they want for the peninsula and how things need to change, they can go to our events page on the website and check that out. We also, of course, we need people to become members, and that's the way they can have their say in everything that we do. What else did I want to say about today? Of course, we've got our T-shirts, and we've also got flashing screens. We've got our stickers available now through the shop on our website. And if you can't attend the kitchen table conversation, you can do our survey, which is on the website, and all that information will be put together in a What Matters report. So we will be able to see what everyone has said.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. Thank you, Eric Campbell. Thank you, Zali Steggall, OAM MP for Warringah. And thank you, Craig Reucassel, Maverick Extraordinaire, for your fabulous work. We wish everybody well. And I think we're sticking around now with Sean, who's going to take us through the Q&A poll for those that want to be part of it. Thanks all. Have a
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Bye.
Bye all.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so Sean, do you want to pick this part of it up now?
Yeah, thank you, Tracee. Sorry, this was a last minute thing that we didn't expect to do, but it was a good suggestion that we had from one of the participants today. So we've chucked up some of the questions that were seeming to be reflected in the actual chat, and that's coming to VMP. So it's just a small chance to get for us to gauge a little bit more what the community wants. And gee, Tracee, what a great job you did. Thank you from all of us at VMP. Really huge thanks.
My pleasure.
You took us through that, and as you said and Louise said, we could probably speak for another few hours about this because it's so important. But as one of the board members of VMP and a growing VMP, I think the whole extended volunteer team of Voices of Mornington Peninsula is really so thrilled with the actual reaction from everybody. So yeah, due to that good suggestion, we thought let's capture some of those thoughts and values and ideas. It's only 4 questions we made up quickly, so please, you see the survey on the screen there too. Get your camera out, and if you want to do a bit more of an elaborate survey, you can do that as well. Louise, you'd like to add something?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to, while we've got everybody here, is a really big shout out to our volunteers, because that's what makes things happen. So there's only 4 of us on the board, so without all those people out there, nothing would be happening. Well, nothing.
Yeah.
But we need all our volunteers, and we thank them very much.
Yeah, and thanks to there's an extended team, as Louise said. My wife Monica sends out the t-shirts, so grab a t-shirt if you want to get one. They're organic cotton. There's the sales pitch for today. But join a member. Mika is doing some great videos to extend the message, and everybody out there that's reaching out beyond the board, it's really growing, and all those people know who they are, and they're really doing some hard yards. There is tonight at 5 o'clock for those who want to attend a kitchen table conversation. Go to Voices of Mornington Pen with the events tag up there. So voicesofmorningtonpen.org.au/events. You can join.
Sorry, Sean. A couple of notes. People saying the poll's not working for them.
Yeah, okay. This is the point in case that we need more volunteers. I'm the techie by default, and I'm not a techie person. So if there's a techie out there, join us. I can't do anything with that at this late.
Some it's working for. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a way around that is that folk could just send through some thoughts on things that they feel are other things that could be fed through the kitchen table.
Yeah, grab Tracee, and the survey there on the bottom right.
Yeah. So I might say my good afternoon to all of you as well. Thank you once again for having me. It allows me to still feel like those 30 odd years that I did as a career broadcaster still have some use. And it's always great to see so many people wanting to engage in community-led democracy, and it's just thrilling to see it on the peninsula. So I wish you all the best, but I'm bailing out.
Thank you, Tracee.
Well done, Tracee. Thank you so much. See you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we're left to our own VMP devices now. Our stars have exited, stage left. Thanks, Chair. Louise, did you want to, as we're getting the polling stuff, would you like to add any last comments to the people who've joined?
Sure. One thing that I think came up, I don't know if it was said directly in the film or whether it's because I've been on so many forums lately. Sometimes I forget where I hear things, but something that really struck me recently, which I think is a really good point and something to remember, is that we tend to talk about politics as a thing, like there's politics. We have to remember that if we say politics is our health, healthcare, it's our education, it's our environment, it's all those things. So it's not a thing. It's something we live every day, and everything that we do in every day, politics affects it. So unless we're actually in there and participating and not it being a spectator sport, we're not going to change anything.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I realised too, just with the URLs, apologies, I was in the lateness of getting, well, not the latest, just the myriad of things need doing. I forgot to put the /shop there. So if you want to get the t-shirt, it's the /shop. Not selling that overly, but just to let you know I made a mistake there. But the QR codes are there. Use those. I know we're just loving QR codes, aren't we, with lockdown? And this is a positive use of QR codes. So get into it. with that, would you like to see some of the live polling of some of the questions that we just posed? So it looks like climate change has come through as the number one issue, which is reflective also of the kitchen table conversations, followed by integrity in politics, probably apt after our conversation today. And this will just be data that we merge with the kitchen table conversations and the survey. So it doesn't mean it's complete, but it's just an indicator. So thanks for filling those in. Can you all see the poll on your screens now?
No.
Okay. I'll just read it out. I'm not sure how I can share that. Let me see if I can. I'll stop this share perhaps. And see if I can share this. Yep, maybe that will work. Can you see it now? No? All right, I'll just read it out. So that was question one, the number one priority you'd like to take to Canberra. So first was climate change, integrity in politics, aged care, affordable housing, and women's safety has come up in other surveys we've been doing as well. How disappointed in the representation of your values? How disappointed are you in the representation of your values by the major parties? 83% said extremely, 14% said very, 1% said moderately, and 1% not at all. How likely are you to vote for a community-endorsed independent that stands for your values? 87% said yes, very likely. 10% said likely, not sure, 1%, no chance, said 0%. So that's good for us. We are in our own little VMP bubble possibly today. There's probably a few interested outsiders looking into, so that's okay. And 1% said I'll be the candidate, so that's good. The candidate process has been asked a lot, and the board's still talking about the process, but just rest assured the community will be engaged with that process in selecting the candidate. The actual process we haven't nailed down. It depends on a few externalities as well. The last question, do you feel empowered or energized by the Big Deal movie and the Q&A that you were part of? First one was absolutely, and I want to get involved. That was 68%. Second was 23% with it's what I expected but worse. 4% said I'm angry and don't know what to do, and 3% said I'm sad and still processing it, which is fair enough too, because there's a lot of big stuff. Even though those of us that are really interested in our politics, there's the enormity of it, and just the for me, Sam Dastyari saying that's just the way it works, like laying it out. That was that was full on. We only did those 4 quick questions, but please, if you can still see can you still see the survey on QR code there?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So if you've got more to say, please click on that and give us a more elaborate response about how you're feeling about things. Please sign up as a member. We need members. That way your voice is included in Voices of the Mornington Peninsula formally, so you'll get to vote on things formally. If you're not from the Mornington Peninsula, you can join up as an associate member. You don't get to vote, but you get to participate. And there is a youth membership as well. So we want to engage the youth of our community in Voices of the Mornington Peninsula so they can have their voices heard too. So that's a really important point. Become a member, fill out the survey, get involved, and you've done that already. So we'll, as a board and as a group of volunteers, we're really enthused and energized by your participation today. So I just want to say, on behalf of the board, Louise, maybe you can sign off the final thing, but just a big thank you from me and everybody involved. It's been great. Louise, over to you for closing comments.
Thanks, Sean. I'm not sure if you said before, but we actually started off having a film license at 100, then we put it to 150, then we put it to 200, and then we put it to 250, and today we had to put it up to 275. So that's extraordinary. So it's a really good indication of people's interest in the topic. So thank you all. Thanks for your time today and helping us create the best VMP that we can. Thank you.
Great one. All right, and with that, we'll sign off and we'll see you. Good evening indeed. And yeah, some of you will be seen at the kitchen table tonight at 5. So check that out on our events page on the website. Thanks, Louise. Thanks everybody.
Everyone. Bye-bye.